This is the Iron Sharpens Iron Movement, sharing insights into the power of people-centric leading.
Hi, this is Jim, and today we welcome to our tribe an award-winning author and recently named on the Inc.'s list of 100 great leadership speakers. She also has been mentioned in the American Management Association's 50 Leaders to Watch. She helps leaders from around the world achieve breakthrough results without losing their souls. This is Karin Hurt.
Iron Sharpens Iron Movement is brought to you by N2 Growth, a leader in executive search, leadership development, and talent management. We find and develop the world's best leaders. Learn more about our practice by visiting us at n2growth.com or click on the link in the show notes of this podcast. Karin, welcome to the Iron Sharpens Iron Movement. We are excited to have you here today. You know, our tribe of listeners are always looking to make themselves better. And I've got to say, the work that you do and the things that I have seen you produce are just amazing. And the book that we are going to talk about today, your newest book, I think is going to resonate with the tribe. So welcome to today's podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, you know, we're going to dive right into it, Karin. And, you know, I know that you are a leadership consultant. You've been out there pounding the pavement for years with your partner, David. And you have really seen kind of the front lines of a lot of the issues that are out there that are facing not only leaders, not only first line managers and supervisors, but the employee at the lowest level too. You've seen it all. And I'm wondering, my first question out of the gate to you is that what was the motivator to create your next book that has just come out here this summer?
You know, it's really interesting. We were noticing a consistent pattern where we would go in and work at the very senior levels of organizations, and we would hear things like, why don't more people bring me ideas? Or why am I the one who has to stumble on this best practice? Or why don't people speak up? Or when they see a problem, why don't they raise it? And then we would be going and doing focus groups or training at the supervisor or the frontline level of the very same organizations. And we would hear things like, nobody wants to hear my ideas. Last time I spoke up, I got in trouble. Nothing ever happens anyway. And we thought, are you working for the same company?
Right.
So employees have ideas, and most leaders really do want to hear them, and yet somehow there was this disconnect. So we partnered with the University of North Colorado Social Research Lab on a really extensive research study that was both quantitative and qualitative to get underneath this phenomenon of what is preventing people from speaking up when they're not sharing ideas. What kind of ideas are they holding back? And the organizations that are doing this extraordinarily well, what are their leaders doing? What are the specific behaviors and what's happening in their culture?
You know, it's kind of funny, Karin, that it's stating the obvious, right? I think anybody that's worked for an organization can absolutely place themselves into saying those comments that you just said, whether they were the boss or the employee. It always seems like there's this gigantic disconnect. It's all about this gap that, just people aren't hearing each other and the perceptions of why and all that. So I love how you have focused this book on it. What I'd love to do is kind of play a little bit of a word game with you. I'm a big believer in words matter. And I am sure that you were very specific about the titling of your book. And kind of the process of it. So, like your book is entitled Courageous Cultures, and it's how to build teams of micro innovators, problem solvers, and customer advocates. Probably every single word was thought about when you wrote that out. So talk to us about Courageous Cultures, because it's one thing to be a change agent, embracing culture, all of those kind of things. But I am sure that you've got a very specific way on how you define what courage is when it comes to culture.
Yes, we were very careful with the word. Our favorite definition of culture, let's start with that word,
Sure.
It comes from Seth Godin, the marketing guru, who says, people like us do things like this, but that's what culture is. I love it because it's so simple. People like us do things like this. So then in a courageous culture, what is it that people like us do? And people like us speak up. we share ideas. The default is to contribute. It's a culture where silence isn't safe and effort is everything. And so that's what we're really trying to advocate for here. And it really starts with navigating your own narrative around courage, and are you willing to speak up? And then what are you doing to cultivate that in the people around you?
Do you find it difficult that when you're talking to probably leaders more than the average employee, say the followers, that they're stuck in the ways? Like when you say, hey, find courage and, there's a way that you should, change the culture. The problem is they probably have created the very culture that you're examining to begin with.
Yeah. So that's the question. We hang out there a little bit at the beginning of the book and say, do you really want to do this? And because not everyone wants a courageous culture. I think there are still some folks that are saying, you know what, I want people just to do what I say. The challenge for that right now, though, and so let's just take this moment in time that we're in right this minute. Right? So imagine you have two managers, and one manager says, you know what, we're living during a pandemic, crazy times. I know exactly what we need to do, right? And so they tell everybody what you need to do. And the other manager says, I believe in this team. I believe in the mission. We still have to get all this work done. And it's the middle of this crazy time. Nobody's written the book on how to lead well in a pandemic, right? Nobody's figured it completely out. Let me ask you, and goes to the team and genuinely listens to the team's ideas of what needs to happen next and uses that in its input. So you've got the one manager who's got one person thinking about it, and you got the other manager who's got maybe a dozen people thinking about it. Who is going to have the better solution of how to lead, of what to do next during this time of uncertainty and change? And so I think that's the most critical piece of this. And when you say so many managers are stuck in their ways, it was interesting. One of the research findings was that 67% of employees said, my manager operates around the notion that this is the way we've always done it.
67%.
Right, which is a lot.
Karin, I will tell you, when I was doing the research for this podcast, one of the things that I highlighted and circled in my notebook was, is this a middle management issue? Is the realities of what we're talking about, the great disconnect, is it truly middle management that is the problem? Are they the ones that are filtering both up and down? Are they the ones that are fearful of both up and down? All of those kind of things. Do you believe it's in all three? But, with 67% of, this filter happening that you just referred to, do you believe probably the greatest crisis is in that middle management kind of scenario?
I do think there is, in many organizations, a huge opportunity with middle managers. And, that's a hard job. And I'm doing that job.
Yeah.
Right? Especially when things are changing so much now. So that's why we talked about this, getting clear around your own thoughts on speaking up. Because a lot of times what you'll see a middle manager do is say, my boss says I need to do this. And then the employees are, feeding ideas up. And if there feels like a disconnect, they're stuck trying to please both, as opposed to I always say that middle managers, one of the best and most important roles is to be a really effective translator. Like to be able to take that vision and mission and translate that down into what actually needs to happen at the front line, and to be a translator in the other direction too, about the feedback about what's really going on, sharing ideas on how to make things better. And I think often middle managers aren't trained well in that translator role.
Have you found in your experience, again, you've seen so many different types of organizations, have you found in your experience that when it comes to human resourcing and where they put their very small amount of training dollars towards leadership, development, and all of those kind of things, most of them put them at senior executive levels, when what you're describing now is probably a real need is at that mid-level manager area where they need to learn the art of translation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's been interesting. Some of our favorite and most effective, highest ROI leadership work that we do is when you do at all the levels, right?
Yeah.
So we have this really great program we're working on right now, and we love it because we started at the president level. So all the regional presidents and then their vice presidents. And then we worked on really understanding what the leadership development needs were, and then we trained them. Now we're training the director level. And so, but what's really interesting is so it's a 7-month program. Well, in between the sessions, so as we go in and train at the director level, in between the time that we're working with the directors, these presidents and vice presidents are working with what we're calling challenger groups, so cross-regional groups of like mentoring circles to reinforce the training. So then the leaders actually become teachers. And so now this conversation that is happening about how are we applying what we're learning? How does this really work around here? I think that's an ideal scenario where you really can make sure that you are having the business impact on the leadership work that you're doing.
I love that. And it probably goes into play about, I'm going to ask you for further definitions, but I bet you it's built upon even just how you were doing that coursework. When this courageous culture, you're talking about building the teams of micro innovators. So I'd love to have that definition, a problem solver. And if that's truly different than a micro innovator, and then customer advocates. When you're trying to score against all three of those, just how do you define them first so that we know what to really put those up against?
Yeah, we were very deliberate in using the word micro innovation, being micro innovator, because what we're talking about here is not tapping into the ideas of your employees to create the new next blue ocean strategy, or a massive pivot. Although a courageous culture could do that too. But what we're talking about is the micro, the mini, the small improvements day to day that improve productivity, that improve the customer experience. And so getting people to coming to work every single day and saying, how can we make this better? And thinking about their own roles, their own jobs. We just did a Courageous Cultures program this morning with a group of engineers in England, which is one of the really fun parts about being live online. We were in Africa earlier today.
Nice.
But one of the things they came up with was, we went through our idea process, and they said, you know what? We just need to get every employee a landline cable so they can hardwire into, so that they're not relying on Wi-Fi, because they were losing so much productivity, right? With people not having the bandwidth, and they're competing with their kids who are in homeschool.
Yeah.
That's a micro innovation, right? That's not rocket science to change that. But when the person came up with that idea, everybody said, yeah, we got to do that right away.
You just know it when you see it, right? Or when you hear it. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, a problem solver is, teaching people the critical thinking skills so that they can look at what's not working and come up with alternative solutions. And then a customer advocate is getting your team to think on behalf of the customer. And I can share a technique that we use for the customer advocate if that would be helpful.
It would be great.
So this is one of my favorite tools, and we discovered it by accident. I was actually on a walk with my sister, and I was sharing with her our Courageous Cultures research and some of the tools we were developing. She's like, Karin, I think we do this where I work. I said, well, please tell me, what is it that you do? She said, so Jill is the director of rehab at WellSpan Health. And she says, when they have a problem or something new, a new strategy that they're working through, or something new they're going to implement, they designate one person in the meeting to only act on behalf of the patient. So, for example, if Joe is the director of IT, in that particular meeting, Joe is not going to be talking or thinking about IT. He can come and bring some of that back in later. He's supposed to sit in that meeting and pretend he is the patient. So they were implementing a new scheduling system. And what the scheduling system was supposed to do is to solve this problem. Like Jill would send one of her people in to do rehab on a patient, and they would find an empty room because the patient was often testing or something. And so that was creating a lot of lost productivity. So this system was going to fix that. Everybody loved the idea of the new system. So they're talking about the system, and the patient in the meeting, not really a patient, right, raises his hand and says, I want to know my schedule too. And everybody went, oh no, right?
Right.
So she said, and they're like, well, and he's like, no, I get it. This is a hospital. There are emergencies. I guarantee, I know my schedule won't be 100% accurate. But even if it's 80% right.
Right. Genius.
I already feel out of control. I have cancer. My wife is here too much. I'd rather her be able to be at home and only come when she really needs to be here.
Yep.
And so she said they implemented it. And it's not perfect, but
sure,
it had a massive improvement in their patient satisfaction scores. So go ahead.
No, I was going to say, Karin, what's interesting is it's a huge aha moment for myself to hear this story, because I'm a huge advocate for having a devil's advocate in the meeting, right? So you've got your round table of leaders. You want to make sure that there's a devil's advocate in the meeting so that, it forces some critical thinking and stuff. But you've taken it one step farther. It's not just someone that's going, what about this or why that? It's through the eyes of the customer.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I love it. And you can play with this in many ways, right? You could, if you are an HR department, you could say, what is let's say, think about what the employees would be thinking.
Right.
Or if you've got a contentious relationship with another department, have somebody act like that other department.
Yep. Again, another so obvious thing, but hardly anybody does it. And it certainly is even harder to execute, because it's easy to execute once you get doing it, but no one takes that first step forward unless someone like you brings this up to everybody and go, have you thought about this? So, you have an interesting stat listed in your book that I want to go back on about problem solving, is the fact that most employees aren't even offered training on how to critically think or any of those kind of things. So when we're trying to empower our team to critically think, it's a bit of an ask when most of them potentially don't even know the concept of that. And that's not belittling anybody. It's just like, how do you critically think? What are kind of the functions of that? How do you initialize some of these things? So how big of a problem do you really think that is on people just really not knowing to critically think?
I will tell you, one of the most interesting things that I felt when I first started, I was at Verizon for 20 years, and we did a lot of work around teaching people to think critically. And so I didn't realize how big of a gap this was when I went out and started working with other companies. But what I found it was so interesting to me is people would come and say, Karin, my people just don't think critically. And so I would dig underneath that. And do you know what the number one issue was almost consistently? Is that people did not have enough context to think strategically. So they didn't know about where the company was really going or where they really needed ideas. And that lack of context, it wasn't that they were dumb, right? They just didn't have enough perspective. And so one of the most important things, and we talk about this in the book, is creating clarity, really being clear that you want people's ideas, but also being really clear about where you need a great idea.
Yeah. How many times as leaders do you fall in the trap of saying, well, that's a cute comment you just made, but you don't know all the facts.
Right.
They say that all the time,
As well as that.
Right. No, exactly right. I am guilty as charged by going, yeah, I'm glad, they made that comment, but they just don't understand everything that's going on. I mean, that's a reaction. I think that's fairly common from a leader. It's a weak reaction. I get that, but what a great point again to flip it on its head and go, the members of your team, if only empowered, could have superpowers on this and really do some critical thinking for you.
Yeah. Yeah. And some people listening may be saying, you know what, I don't really need any more ideas. We have a lot going on. And if you have that, that's when you need to really narrow it down where you need a great idea. This just happened on our own team, right? We teach this. And one of our folks said, I've got this fantastic idea for your business. And it was 180 degrees different than where we're headed strategically right now.
Wow.
And I thought, well, gosh, thank you for thinking about the business. But shame on me because we've been moving so fast.
Right.
I've gotten her caught up to speed on this fast pivot and exactly what our strategic plan is. And so I had to, take a step back and say, first of all, thank you for thinking about our business, right?
Right.
Really appreciate that. Here's some more context. This is what 2021 looks like for us. These are a couple of our key strategic priorities. Can you tell me what ideas you have around that? Because this other direction is not something that we can pull off or want to pull off in the next couple of years. And that if you can respond in that way, you can then she's now she's thinking more critically around the areas where we really do need good ideas.
Yeah, it brings focus. A person is empowered when focused, or anything is empowered even more when it's focused. So does it come down? Does it really come down to almost the Covey theory on speed of trust? I mean, how do you differentiate, I guess, because I'm sure you are asked this question all the time too, that, well, if there was only high trust throughout all the ranks on the team, we would never have this problem. So all we need to do is focus on high trust. So how do you differentiate a little bit or is it really just what we are talking about and you've got like a really focused methodology to get into it?
Well, it's grounded in psychological safety or the speed of trust, right? So, Dr. Amy Edmondson of Harvard was really a pioneer of psychological safety, and her research wrote the foreword to our book. And one of the things that she talks about is this is foundational. You've got to have the psychological safety. And then from there, what our methodology does, once you have that psychological safety in place, then this is how do you get clear about where you need your ideas, proactively go out and ask for the ideas, respond to those ideas, create an infrastructure for courage, look at all your HR systems and processes, right? And then, what we call galvanize the genius. So, what she says in the foreword is start with psychological safety. And then if you want really practical ways to do this well, read this book. And,
awesome.
I really, one of the things I found so interesting about her work is she talks about people are more likely to hang on to a negative experience than a positive one.
Sure.
So why this is so important for your listeners, because I know your audience are people who already believe this, right? There are people who are wanting to be servant leaders who are doing this well. It is possible, even if you are leading in that way, that somebody on your team has had a negative experience in the past, and you may be underestimating how much they're holding on to that and still afraid to speak up, even though you've never given them any reason not to trust you.
Yeah. That's so important for leaders. And again, when we talk leading at any level, for people to recognize that very simple human dynamic. We have had on the Iron Sharpens Iron Movement podcasts in the past that we've talked about this, this focus on negativity is a very primal thing. This goes back 10,000 years to when we were cavemen and women, and it is in everybody, and it's how they control it, and you don't understand the factors that are around certain people's lives and all of those kind of things. It's a very powerful thing that's happening. It's nothing to be scared of, but just understanding the fact that people lean towards negativity. It's just a thing that happens. There's no doubt. So Karin, you've established psychological safety. We understand how that's kind of tied into trust. And we're getting after the old-fashioned, old-school suggestion box that's hanging out right next to the exit of the company headquarters, and it's empty. No one ever puts anything in there except for bubblegum wrappers and things like that. But you want an overflowing suggestion box of micro innovators and problem solvers and advocates for the customer. Talk a little bit about how, if you've established this psychological safety and you feel like you want to empower the team now, the 7-step process that you have, if you want to lightly touch about how the book truly dives deep into each one of these things. And something else I guess I want to tee up for you, Karin, before we get into these 7 steps is one of the things that I found fascinating in the book is that you encourage leaders to sit down with the team, and you don't have to digest this book all at once. You can go kind of step by step and really kind of dive deep as a group into what all this means.
Yes. So we have definitely we're all about being practical. So there's not a lot of theory in this book. There's some research and then there's a technique. Mm-hmm. And so, it really begins with what we call navigating the narrative, which I mentioned earlier, but that's really thinking about your own moments of courage. And we do an exercise called courage mapping, where we ask you to think back on your career and talk about what are the moments that you really acted courageously and what were the values that underlie that, right? And so, because why do we do that? To overcome this, because you too probably have had negative experiences with speaking up, and we want to bring these positive ones to the forefront first. And then we have a tool we call the Fear Forage, which is how do you really tap into the hopes and fears of your team, and how do you do that in a safe way? And that is something that we have been doing in almost every Courageous Cultures program that we've been doing since the pandemic, and making, surfacing those invisible fears and letting people talk about them is so empowering for folks, because it makes them realize that they're not alone. So that's the first step. Then it's creating clarity, being clear about 2 things. 1, that you really want people's ideas, and 2, what a great idea would accomplish. So, for example, in the program that we just did this morning around Courageous Cultures, and this is typical of how we'll do a Courageous Cultures program, we talked with a senior leader, and he identified 5 critical strategic areas where they needed a great idea. Then we walked them through these tools, and we put them into Zoom breakout rooms, and every room dealt with 1 strategic area, used the tools to generate the ideas. And so that's clarity. That's different than just saying, does anybody have any ideas on how to improve the business? And, because that's really hard and intimidating for folks.
Oh, absolutely.
And then it's cultivating curiosity, and this is deliberately going out and asking for people's ideas. So this is beyond having an open door. This is beyond putting a suggestion box by the door, right? Because it still takes courage to walk through an open door for most people.
You bet.
And a suggestion box is passive. So how do you proactively go out and one of the things we talk about is courageous questions, asking courageous questions. A courageous question differs from a general, how can we make it better question in 2 ways. 1, it's specific, and 2, it's vulnerable. And so what do I mean by that? One of my favorite courageous questions came from a client of ours, Don Yeager at Mural, which is a contact center company. He asks his frontline people, the people on the phones, consistently, what is 1 policy we have that just sucks? So
okay. Everybody has at least one.
It's vulnerable because it's assuming we have policies that are ticking off our customers, right?
Right.
And it's specific. It's not intimidating. Like, it's not, what are all the policies that are getting in the way? That's a lot, especially for somebody who's busy on the phone all the time. But just give me 1. And then, of course, once you ask for 1, it's very easy to say, oh, great, thank you. Anything else? And so you've created a conversation. And I think the key that is working for Don, and I'm a raving fan of him, as I've known him for a decade, and he truly does work to create a courageous culture, what I think is so important for his approach is he's doing it consistently. So it's not like
Wow.
it's just one day he goes out, tries to get people's ideas, and then goes away for 6 months. But they know that by his repetition, that he really does want their ideas. So you navigate the narrative, you create clarity, you cultivate curiosity, and then the fourth step, which is so important and really gets to the crux of this research, because 50% of the people said the reason that they don't share an idea is that nothing will happen with the idea. That's what they believe.
I
And a
bet.
lot of the breakdown there comes in this step, which is respond with regard. It's
Mm.
what are you doing with the ideas? And it doesn't mean you're implementing them all, but it's what is the feedback loop? So you want to start always with gratitude, thanking people for the idea, even if it's half baked, even if it's dumb, you thank
Yep.
them for the contribution. Then provide information, which is sharing detail about what are you going to do with the idea. So say the idea is already implemented. Well, then you say, that's such a great idea. Did you know we're already doing that? Here's where you can learn more. Or information. Well, what if the idea's not going to move forward? It's not strategically aligned with where you're headed. Thank you so much for this idea. Did you know we're not going to implement that idea, and here's why? Because really, where we're headed strategically around is in this direction, and that would take us in a different direction. And then an invitation. Do you have any ideas that would help us solve this issue? Right?
I
And
love
so
that.
if you always can gratitude, information, and an invitation, then that way you know that people will continue to contribute your ideas.
I love that. It's so interesting when we get into the psychology of the human beings again, like there is a huge urge to be recognized, which is what you're saying with acknowledgement, and rewarded. And it doesn't have to, we're not talking financial rewards or a $5 Starbucks coupon kind of thing, but just that reward of self-satisfaction that they heard you, you were acknowledged. We celebrate the fact that, this could work or not. But I think beyond the reward and recognition part is this invite. I think that's pretty powerful, Karin. I'm interested to know, like, as you have deployed this, is the invite thing, what else do you have to help us be a solution builder? All of those kind of things. Is that your most powerful piece to this? Because it keeps it circular, it keeps it still alive instead of just the one thing, the one aha moment.
Yes, yes, it's the
Interesting.
invitation. And
Yeah.
so you may say, well, what do you do if you have what we call an idea grenadier, right? So that person is like lobbing ideas at you for you to. Right? We've all had people like that on our
Yeah.
team, and
It's the good idea fairy.
yes, yes, yes. So this is we have this model that we call the idea model, and we love acronyms. But the idea model is how do you help people vet their ideas? So this is if you've got someone who needs to think more critically, you need to train them to think more critically, or you have an idea grenadier who's full of too many ideas, or you just have a group of people that you want to brainstorm ideas and think it through so it's not half baked. Use this model. Why is this idea interesting? Meaning, why is this idea strategically aligned with the area where we said we need an idea, right? Where we're headed? Why is it strategically aligned with one of our key priorities? So D, is it doable? And this one is so important for
Oh, wow.
people right now because most of us have more of the work than we can possibly manage at this moment in time.
Yep.
And that we've really been concentrating with our clients on what can you do in the next 18 months? Let's not think, yes, you need to have your strategic planning conversations, but right now, most of the ideas we need are things to get through this.
You bet.
E, is it engaging? And this is, who else might think this is a great idea? Who else do we need to get involved? So this is teaching your team to think about stakeholders or to thinking about, drawing people in. So, often in one of these programs that we'll do, inevitably, given the challenges that people are having with the fast pivot to working from home and all of that, a lot of the ideas need HR, at least to bless them. right?
Right.
You want to change the work hours or the schedules. It doesn't mean you can't do that. It just means that engaging step. Who do you need to pull in, right? So you don't go to code
Makes
without
sense.
trouble. And then, what are a couple of actions, key next steps? And just so when people bring you an idea and you say, "Hey, I hear you have a lot of great ideas. Why don't you bring me your best one? Run it through this model, and I'd love to hear it." And it makes
Love it.
people think through it just a little bit more.
Yep. I love it. Right. It pushes the person that may be a little fearful, and it brings the good idea fairy, or the what's your term that you use?
Idea grenadier.
It slows them down.
Yeah.
It slows them down. Yeah. Awesome. Great model, and easy acronyms to learn for sure and memorize. So we've got them through that acknowledgement, that celebration, that, inviting for more contributions. I'm not going to get you off the hook here. So there's still 3 more principles to talk about a little bit.
Yeah. So then we talk about, practicing the principle.
Oh, I used that word. Sorry. Yes.
And practicing the principle. This came about because have you ever had a situation where somebody comes up with a great idea, and then the manager goes, "Okay, everybody needs to go do this now."
Oh gosh.
And it might not work across contexts, and I won't go into it here. But in the book, I use a case study from when I was leading a large sales team at Verizon, and what worked in Cedar Bluff, Virginia, is very different than what would work in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
The principle was the same, which was really understanding the customer base, the market, and so to scale a best practice, you need to think, okay, what's the nugget? What's the best practice in this best practice? And then how do we help people think about how that idea will apply across context? And I think that's really an important. I would say that's more of an advanced skill of this. Once you've got the basics down, and then we talk about galvanizing the genius, which is how do you, once you've got the idea and you practice the principle and how do you get that now built back into the fabric of your organization? So we talk about this elegant dance between clarity and curiosity. And so the galvanizing the genius is once you've been clear about where you need an idea, you've gone out, cultivated curiosity, asked for those ideas. Galvanizing the genius is now how do you get clear again that this is how we're going to do things? This is how people like us do things, right? Like this. And then finally, and this one is so important, which is creating an infrastructure for courage. And what do we mean by that? This is like, what are your HR systems working for you or against you on this thing? And one of the things that, so if you've got a stacked rank that's forcing competition, people are more likely to keep their best ideas to themselves. That's one example.
Great point.
Another is, I see this mistake almost everywhere we go, which is onboarding. Most companies view onboarding as a clarity exercise. This is the way we do things around here. These are our policies. This is our vision. These are our values. Clear, 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 clear. You're missing an opportunity if you only do that. All of that is critical. But you've got people probably coming from your competitors, right? Who, while it's fresh, how do you get curious?
Wow.
So here's our strategy. How'd your past employer handle that, right? And get their ideas from the minute they walk in the door. And there's 2 reasons that's important. One is it's reinforcing that you really do mean it when you say you want people's ideas from day one. And 2, you are pulling in and getting these ideas while they're fresh before they start really getting totally ingrained in the way you do things around here.
Shazam. That is a Shazam moment for sure right there. It's so funny, Karin, about how all you're doing is you're turning on the light to a lot of things that are just so obvious, and like just people choose to let it go, or they don't see it. They're numb to a lot of these things. But I applaud you for going. These 7 steps can change your organization and your own personal and professional livelihoods by just kind of following this very simple process that everybody, it's familiar. A lot of your examples are familiar. Everybody be like, oh, I can remember a thing like that, or yep, that's happened to me before. But you don't just stack them together and then execute on it like that. It's awesome. It's awesome. I will tell you, I think you have left us hungry to deep dive even more. And I know this book is going to really kind of open a lot of our eyes into more of these Shazam moments. And I'm really excited to introduce the book to the listeners out there, because I think this is one that's going on the bookshelf for everybody out there to make themselves and their organizations better. Karin, people like us doing the things like this is something that's going to stick with me for a very long time. So I invite you to, for our tribe of listeners, I think you have whetted our appetite to just dive deeper into being courageous and to truly understand how we can have a better culture of these micro innovators and these problem solvers, and always focus on that customer. And I'd love for you to give us kind of a last thought, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah. So what I would say is you might be listening and thinking, that all sounds great. I sure wish I worked in a courageous culture.
Mm-hmm.
That won't work for me. I'm not the CEO. And here's what I would say. If you are feeling that way, find the others. Find who else in your organization also wants this, and work together, and work to just, you don't have to go out and declare, hey, everybody, we're going to build a courageous culture. Just find one area where you really need a great idea, and then go out and ask a couple of people a courageous question and see what they come up with. Respond with regard. So, be the courageous leader you want your boss to be.
I love it. Karin, you have found those others in this tribe of listeners here. There is no doubt about us. And thank you for bringing the idea of courageous culture to us for this podcast. Really appreciate your time, and thanks for your energy.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been absolutely my pleasure.
Awesome. Thanks again, Karin.
Thanks for joining our leadership movement this week. Talking to Karin about courageous cultures, how to build teams of micro innovators, problem solvers, and customer advocates really gets after the connection of leadership and culture. Don't forget our show notes are posted on the website with key leader takeaways, and be sure to subscribe to the podcast and tell a friend so we can continue to build the tribe. Until next time, remember that iron sharpens iron. Make yourself and others around you better every single day.